Present! Arms! Shoulder! Arms! Shoulder, arms. 3, 4, shoulder, arms. Order, arms. Order, arms. Order, arms. Unfix, finish. 3, 4, unfix, finish. Shoulder! Arms! Parade will move off to the right. Spy sections on your left. Backwards wheel. Quick, march! 34. Facing. To the left. Left face.
You were in a line. Get in a line. You wheeled into a line.
34. Prepare to march with immediate.
Move
Right
back!
shoulders forward. March.
March!
Yep. Keep going. Keep going. Right shoulders forward. Forward. Shoulders forward. March.
Malden. I will try to speak your language. English, some of you, eh? Angli. Nomen meum es Quintus Fabricius, Centurio Legionis, Triginte, et Milites Nostre. Now, many of you are familiar with... Did you want to say something? Very good. Many of you growing up watching Roman movies and stuff like that, you hear the word catapult, or maybe even ballistic. That's a generic term, catapulta. It's like Colosseum. The Romans did not use the word Colosseum, right? So, basically today, we're going to be seeing a scorpion. I want everyone to say Scorpio.
Scorpio.
Now, what are they famous for? What are scorpions famous
Stinging.
for? What?
Killing.
Killing and stinging. There you go. So, in general, ballista, catapulta means throwing stuff, right? So what we'll see is some ammunition by a Scorpio. Every legion had several of these in different types, primarily an anti-horse and personnel device. Before we continue, I want to verify that our field is clear. Field clear?
I am not sure.
Well, we have to await your command.
By your command.
Your target is the meat truck.
Meat truck.
Lunchtime. Prandium, as we say.
It is clear.
Clear. Anyway, so you're not going to see Romans in a lot of different places, but part of the evolution of the military and the soldier, of course, involves the idea of an artillery, because a device, a machine, can do more than a person can. You also have to remember that war is about 98% psychological. You want to scare the sterkus out of your opponent. Go Google the word if you want to find out. Prepare the piece. Are we prepared? Load the weapon. We are loaded. Clear the field, downrange. Mitite. A kill. Reload. Did you hear the whistle?
Yeah.
A few less goals. Another good. Nice one. Well done. Let's thank the legs. Secure the field, secure the piece. Son de cuestiones.
Yeah, how fast would they have, like in the war, did they have a certain amount of seconds to get her done?
As fast as you can. There's no recorded in any of the great works of classical military history, any kind of military standard. Later on, you see a standard of 3 rounds in a minute or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's as many and how trained or well and lucky they were. I
Right.
mean, these things are temperamental and such. But the idea, again, is to scare the crap out of the barbarians.
So in a field of battle, how many of those would be?
Well,
set up?
ideally, each squad would have one if they were fully supplied. So that's a lot of arrows going down, Roy, and different size ammunition. Sometimes the pieces were larger. Take out the horses, and that, of course, spreads terror. If we can take out the enemy commander, then the soldiers are going to be lost.
How much?
Now, we have a
How
camp
far-
demonstration down here. You see military artifacts if you'd like to try on some Roman gear. Plus, we also have a special exhibit of Roman wine merchants. So you're all welcome down to Rome. Gratias. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, what was actual, like, of an actual, like a war one? What would be the range of those?
Yeah.
About what you saw. Now, the
Yeah.
bigger ones have more torsion.
Yeah.
Ironically, they kept German slave women because of their hair. It was a special texture and toughness that were used to make the torsion material in the springs.
Really?
It was a renewable resource. So the hair,
Oh, that's
anyway, it's an interesting tidbit from history. Not a nice thing, but it is what it is. The Romans were terrible people. That's all I can say. Gratias.
Thank you.
I don't know. Red to the bottom.
Red's to the top.
Red's to the top.
It represents the blood on the end. I know, but did you want to do drill first? Don't worry about it, Bruce.
No?
He says we'll do 10 tagging, so...
Okay. Sorry.
So you'll see that slowly turn to
Okay.
I'll go get the cones because I know there's 3 man.
Oh, is that right?
holes
Okay.
in
Yeah,
here.
there was a couple of things in the middle. We'll see the stuff in the middle.
Well, good day, everybody, and welcome to Fort Malden National Historic Site for our Living History Festival. Woo! We have reenactors, presenters from all over North America, actually, have come here, portraying a variety of time periods, multiple time periods, and we're very thankful to be here. Our next demonstration is about the First World War, and I'm going to hand the mic over to the organizer of this group that you're going to see in a few minutes, Mr. Tim Gillies, and he will talk to you all about what's happening. So here we go.
Thank you very much. We got 2 of our horses out. Usually we try to get 4 horses out, but just so much going on this weekend. We got 2 riders out. The one horse on the far side is Skinner, and the other one is Gamble. Gamble is the horse that does the touchdown laps for Western football. They're both off the track race horses from Fort Erie. They're beautiful. They're quick. They're smart. Everything you want. So they're riding in formation riding right now. This makes them be able to handle the horse good. They've got a lance. Lance isn't really used in World War I, but it was used in teaching horsemanship, because now they're forced to ride with one hand. So that's a skill. That's what the Mounties also do. They're wearing a Stetson. That was a dress cap at the end of the war, used by some of the occupation forces the Canadians sent into Germany. They've got some gear on their horse. They've got an empty rifle bucket. They've got all the proper kit for World War I horse tack. It's called universal pattern. You could take pieces off of one horse and put it on the other. They all fit the same. So you don't have painted horses in the First World War. You don't have gated horses. They're not riding racks. Quarter horses. Question is, what was the number 1 cargo going to Western? Munitions, horses, oats, 8 horses, ships, feed the horses. Probably had 500,000 horses in France, but do not have that kind of feed in France. So that would be brought in all around the world. Entire ships were dedicated to bring feed in for the horses. These guys are in a half section. A normal section is 4 horses. And they're just going through the drills. Picture a squadron of 200 horses. These horses are about 16 inches high. Cavalry horse is about 15 feet, 15 inches high. During the war, we're going around. Good job, Bill. Thank you.
Go, go.
We can see our first section
Down.
This is an amazing way to attack an enemy front. Instead of just all going off in one line, charging bayonets, where you're susceptible to machine gun fire and gas attack, this is a perfect way to break up your forces, allow them to move, especially when you are following behind a creeping barrage, another thing brought in by the Canadians in the First World War. Creeping barrage, of course, is landing your artillery in front of your infantrymen as they advance forwards, keeping the enemy in their dugouts, in their trenches, until your forces are on top of them, where they can take the day and take the trench.
Step. 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 Side. Step. 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 Step.
Basically, once these guys are out here, they're loaded up.
Hello, bonjour. Welcome to Fort Malden National Historic Site. We're going to be doing what is called a noonday gun. So basically what they would do is they would fire at noon so that everybody at the fort and in the town could essentially synchronize their chronometers so that everybody knew that it was noon at military time. Everybody synced up their watches or their pocket watches or clocks, and that would be every single day. Today has something special as part of our Living History Festival. Normally it's just our 1 6-pounder that we fire. Today we are joined by reenactors from the Earl of Moira and the Amherstburg Provincial Marine. So you'll see the 2 guns that are closer to the museum, the smaller guns. Those are 3-pounder cannons, so they fire a 3-pound ball. So sort of like I guess like a tennis ball essentially. The gun that's closer to the barracks here is a 6-pounder, firing a 6-pound ball, or just under 3 kilograms. A little bit larger, of course. All of these could also fire anti-personnel projectiles, such as canister shot. It was like a tin can filled with musket balls, and when it fired out, the tin would rip apart, and it would shred basically into that those musket balls go flailing against the enemy. They're currently going through the loading procedure. The intention here is that they will fire at noon. I want to give everybody very fair warning. This is going to be extremely loud. All these folks that are on the piece are wearing hearing protection. So for those of you who obviously don't have hearing protection, I highly, highly suggest that you cover your ears when you hear the commands, prepare to fire, and then after that it'll be fire. These are incredibly loud weapons. The hope here is that we can get a volley to fire. So the ideal world is that all 3 cannons fire at exactly the same time. Very, very difficult to do, to basically try to synchronize that. So it's fairly unlikely, let's be real, but we're going to definitely try to do a volley of cannon fire for this, and hopefully as close to noon as possible. So right now, you can see the ones that are closest to us, they're just charging the piece, so they're putting the cartridge into the barrel. They'll take out a rammer and ram the cartridge all the way to the back of the breech. Make sure it's well seated, at which point they're going to take out a sharp metal wire, essentially, and they're going to pierce a hole in that cartridge. That cartridge is, of course, filled with black powder, the explosive. Once they've pierced a hole in it, they'll put a fuse in. That fuse normally would be a goose quill filled with black powder. And so that when the rope touches it, it will immediately set off that fuse, sending that fire into the main charge and firing out the cannon. Now this will be instantaneous. It's not like Bugs Bunny where it'll take forever for that fuse to go. This is going to be extremely quick. The minute they say fire and the burning rope at the back touches that fuse, it will fire. So we're just finishing up loading the pieces. We have a couple that are ready. Can everybody that's standing by the museum, if you could just raise your hand that you can hear me? Good. I just want to make sure everybody got the message that this will be loud. So please make sure you cover your ears.
Advance! Linstocks! Prepared fire! Fire!
Well, we got 2 to volley. That's awesome. Well done. So they're going to secure the pieces, just making sure that they're all nice and safe. Make sure that you take time today to check out all the things that we have happening at our Living History Festival. So aside from the normal Fort Malden operations of our cookhouse, where I believe they're cooking a stew, actually I can smell it, to be honest, our soldiers' barracks, our officers' quarters, our wee little pensioners' cottage at the north end of the site, and of course our museum. But we also have all these encampments at different time periods. Feel free to go and check it out, talk to some of the folks. Some of these people have driven from hundreds of kilometers away to be here to put on their different uniforms and talk about the different time periods that they have. If you haven't checked the schedules, we have them, of course, in our museum building. And any of the Parks Canada staff, you see most of them dressed in the kind of similar uniform that I'm wearing. They can tell you all sorts of things of what we have happening. It's going to be quite an action-packed day. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Me too. I have felt like that. This heat takes block and send you.
The idea is it's going up higher, drop it down inside of a board. Those generally are what you're going to have the field guns, you're going to have a round shot. That's what we call those. We don't call them cannonballs. We call those round shot. You would have round shot. You may have canister shot. So basically think soup can with ball bearings in it.
Oh.
Yeah, so they could either be grape shot, and a grape shot is larger, depending on the size of the caliber of the gun. So those are large, like anti-personnel. It's just going to scatter
like
out.
a
Big
messy bomb.
big shotgun, right?
Yeah.
The grape shot is smaller. It's for closer range because those smaller pieces are not going to go as far. And then you have chain shot, you have bar shot, but those generally were not on the fields. They were in naval. So the chain shot, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's like two big, half of a round shot on each end of a chain, and it'd be a chain that was like about this long. And the bar shot was kind of the same. It'd be and it would spin. And so it was for naval because it would tear up the rigging in the sails and stuff.
Oh, okay. Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What you for
Now I can see.
Thank you.
Bacon.
Yes.
That'll be sweet.
This is a mobile or a traveling port.
Too late. You're gonna catch us eating?
Yeah, right on.
My friend told me how to stop you from fighting with me. Goes over, turns off her chair. She's like,
He's hilarious.
watch your mind. But yeah, like that's good. Like the non-violent solution. But yeah, oh my god, so good.
I'm really hoping the rain.
So this is the setup of an officer's. Exactly. Yeah. So.
So later on.
Look at that truck. Look at that new one.
Now, did you guys
over here. See those islands over there? Did you guys know that those islands are made by people? That island there has been here for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. But all these ones over there, they had really big, huge bulldozers that were so big that they could scoop dirt up from under the water, and they made those islands. You know why? That's crazy. So here's the thing, is this spot on the river here, you can see big ships go by, and maybe if you're lucky while you're here, you'll see a big ship. But on the other side of that island, a long time ago, you couldn't fit a ship. It was so shallow, some of the water, that it would only go up to here if I was going to stand out there. So what they did is on the other side of the island, they took a big dirt scooper and they scooped out all the dirt and they plopped them into those islands. So now ships can go on that side of the island and on the other side. So, yeah, more towards the south. Yeah, Lava Island. It's like Lava Island is what happens when you're on English name.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I know the Duke of Kent, like I say, younger brother.
I actually read a book that was everything that you were telling us. So
they would purposely have weakened, like not as thick barbed wire in that crossfire section. So you're funnel them right in. So as they're rushing in, there'd be anywhere from 2 to 6 machine guns already pre-sighted, and upon notice they just fire. And that much bullet, that many bullets with how much it varies, that whole area
just spit out. So they're just spitting out brass like ting 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 ting. So the brass is just getting flung forward. It's supposed to go through here and forward. So you will see a little pile of brass.
Yeah, but it looks like our team back yet. That's where
I can get a hot dog at work.
He was really good at skiing, and I'm not a good skier. Okay, so then I have to wake for it.
It's falling good now, Vicky.
Does it need water?
No, it's good.
Okay.
You haven't pushed him over the edge yet?
It's like the size of him.
Only 7.
And then the next morning we got up, and Mandy had all the bills on college. He went to college. They get together 3-4 times a year still. So they had rented a house and then we left them, we went over to another friend's place, we were hanging out there back there. Natalie called Mandy and said, hey, we're sitting in the driveway. Oh, you want to take you for a ride in they have a Bronco. You got to see
Yeah, I want to see
that. Took Mandy for a drive. And that allowed me and the couple that we were hanging out with to get over the baseball diamond. And we secretly planned a softball game. There was 40 of us.
No, go ahead.
I saw the half the unit was just right up there.
Yep.
180 until about 2:31. It finally disappeared.
Yeah.
And at that point, they went back to.
I'm going to talk to the guys in the wine.
So I know this is the classic example of like.
Yes.
So that'd be from one.
Good day.
Have a good one.
And so before that, they wore chains. And I know after that, they wore I know eventually they started having like
Have you ever seen Jaws? You should fix that.
Well, if we can believe Marius, who said his mules, you couldn't tell their arms from their legs. Now that tells you something. These guys, they're not tall, but they're like oxen.
It's nice to be long.
Just here for the vibes. So Amanda's mother is Deborah Honor. Oh. So you go back to the museum.
I would have said his dad's Robert. He used to work here.
That too. the legend of Malden.
It's a giant web.
The area here has a lot of history back there.
Yeah, what are these?
Test 1, 2. Can we all hear me?
No.
Wonderful. So I don't know how far this goes, but if people who aren't on the porch want to be on the porch to watch our musket demonstration, we are starting right now. Just all a little bit in case we have some. So, hello, bonjour. Welcome to Fort Malden National Historic Site, and welcome to our Living History Festival.
Yeah. Okay. So you know what?
Amazing.
We're gonna do.
So I'm going to introduce myself a little bit. My name is Killian. I'm going to be doing all your interpretation for you, so then you guys actually know what's going on here.
Yeah.
And then the real stars of the show are at the moment beside me to my right. We have our drill squad here at Fort Malden, or some
Okay, and
members
then I'm
of
gonna
it.
halt you.
The vast majority
and
of them portraying the 34th Cumberland's Regiment of Foot. They were stationed here in the latter months of the Operation Rebellion. We do also have a gentleman in green. He is a someone on the militia. Volunteer force fighting here in defense of the home.
Squad, prepare to march.
Then the gentlemen in the top hats, those are members of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. They were sent to Lake Erie to act as the Marines on aboard the ships of the Marines.
Left
Finally,
forward.
behind is a member of the
Forward.
As these guys move out, what they're going to be shooting today, all of them are some form of flintlocks. And we're going to wait for the rest of the crowd, but those walking, please make haste. Go fast, double time, double time, double time. Sound like an auctioneer.
They're shooting. Get on the porch, please.
Maybe that one will work. So what all of these guys have, they have varying forms of flintlock firelocks. So the gentlemen in the red, they are holding the Brown Bess musket. This was the standard issue firelock of the British Army for nearly 100 years. It had a century of service. It was absolutely incredible, as you can imagine, with it being in that 100 years. I'm not going to talk about them, but this stands for all of the other muskets on the field as well. They operate the same way. So like I said, these are smoothbore flintlock mechanisms. What smoothbore means is, unlike a modern firearm, where there's rifling down the barrel, so grooves that allow a projectile to spin while the firearm is fired. These are just completely smooth. They're as smooth on the inside as they are on the inside. They're just really fancy pieces of pipe. So sometimes you will hit your target. Instead of a projectile spinning as it exits this barrel, it is instead going to rattle down the end of that barrel. And whatever way it rattles last is really the way it's going to go, giving it an effective range of around 150 to 200 meters. After that, you kind of get out of luck. There was a solution to these accuracy problems, but I will talk about those in a moment. Another part of these is that flintlock mechanism. If anyone here is big into camping or plays the video game Minecraft, that one's more directed to the youth in the crowd, you'll know what flint and steel is. So when it triggers, a flint rock spike flies down, strikes a piece of steel, creates a shower of sparks, and ignites the priming powder that they put in the pan. This has worked very, very well, but there are some problems to this, in that all of your action is on the outside, so it's susceptible to the elements. If it's windy, if it's rainy, if it's too hot, if it's too cold, if it's humid, if the musket woke up in a bad mood, it really won't fire. And so because of that, you need to fire, and what we're doing here, this linear warfare. So instead of having one guy ducked behind a tree, you're instead going to grab 100 of your best friends. You're all going to stand shoulder to shoulder and load and fire at the exact same time. The way these things work, we'll walk through. So first, the soldiers are going to reach into their cartridge box and take out a paper cartridge. This is a tube of paper filled with both a musket ball and black powder. The paper acts as its wadding. They're going to rip off the top, spit the excess out at the enemy, and then prime their pans with a little bit of powder. From there, they're going to put the rest of the charge down the barrel of their muskets, withdraw a very long stick called a ramrod, and ram the rest of the charge back to the bottom of that. Then from there, they can bring it back to their hip, where they're going to pull that hammer all the way back to full cock. When they, on the order, make ready, they're going to, like I said, pull it all the way back, present, they're going to put it up to their shoulder, and finally fire. They're going to pull that trigger, and that hammer is going to fall down, strike the frizzen, which is our little piece of steel, creating a shower of sparks and igniting the priming powder. That powder will then explode, make a nice explosion beside their faces, and then that explosion will travel down through a tiny little pinhole called the touch hole. That will then ignite the rest of the charge. The British were absolutely fantastic at these linear tactics. A standard British soldier could load and fire within 15 seconds. But we are going to move a little over to our friend in blue on the far end. Like I said, he is a member of the U.S. infantry. And what he's shooting, making that nice big bang, is a blunderbuss. This was the grandfather to the shotgun. You can load a whole bunch of powder in there and really whatever you want. A bunch of shots, nails, glass. And if you've watched Pirates of the Caribbean, they threw forks in these things. And they were used primarily as naval weapons. So if you're boarding a ship or trying to go through a tight doorway, this is wonderful for clearing anything that may be in your path. They're absolutely fantastic. This is our musket demonstration over. They made a pretty good bang for you. I think they did fantastic. I don't know about you guys. But like I said, just so we know who's here, we have two members of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. We have the 34th Regiment of Foot, the Essex Militia, and the US 21st. So once again, we'll give them a round of applause. They did absolutely wonderful. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns about anything I talked about, anything you've seen, please feel free to ask myself or any other uniformed member of staff. If not, we have a whole schedule of events lined up for us today. We're very, very busy, but I hope you guys enjoy your visit. Thank you so much for visiting us here at Fort Malden National Historic Site. On behalf of myself and all of Parks Canada, thank you and have a good rest of your day.
March. Step. Step. Left foot forward. We'll get them. Forward. Step. Right. Step. Step.
It's here, right?
Step. Step. Right. Step. 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 Right. Step. Right shoulders. Forward. Forward. Step. Right. Step. Halt. Halt. Recover. Arms. Open pants. Release the springs. To the front. Large arms. So we'll go deep on with them.
Today, I would like to tell you the story of Fort Malden, the people that lived and worked here. Immediately following the American Revolution, British engineers started scouting a suitable placement for fortification on the Canadian side of the river for the inevitable day that they would be forced to cede the Fort of Detroit to the United States of America. In July 1796, Jay's Treaty of Amity, Commerce, and Navigation formally established the border, and the first soldiers arrived here to start construction on a new fort, to be named Fort Amherstburg. The regiment that built the fort was the Royal Canadian Volunteers, wearing a uniform style mostly attributed to the American Revolutionary period. After clearing the space of trees and brush, the soldiers built a very large fortification to protect the naval yards in Amherstburg. The first fort was actually about twice the size of the current site. As the fort was built, the town of Amherstburg was also constructed. Along with barracks and stores, a powder magazine, a blacksmith shop, and officers' quarters, outside of the fort's walls there was a council house built for the meeting between the British Indian Department and their indigenous allies. It was here that ceremonies were held regularly for the distribution of annuities, and most particularly to provide indigenous warriors with critical weapons and ammunition so they could defend themselves against American expansion westward. This act by the British Indian Department of giving the First Nations warriors war materiel was not unnoticed by the United States, and coupled with trade issues as the British Royal Navy was blockading Napoleonic France, and the Navy's practice of impressing American sailors, the United States of America formally declared war on the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland on June 18, 1812. The first action on the Detroit frontier was on July 2nd, 1812. The American commander of the Army of the Northwest, Brigadier General William Hall, had been marching his army towards Detroit. When he got to the Maumee River in Ohio, he hired the schooner Cuyahoga to transport his sick soldiers, the officers' baggage, and perhaps most heinously, all of his military paperwork, which included the state of his army, the disciplinary issues of his army, his orders of battle, and even his plans for the invasion of Canada. As this ship sailed up the Detroit River, unknowing that the United States of America had declared war a fortnight before, the British at Amherstburg were already aware of the declaration and sent out a boat of sailors, led by a lieutenant of the Provincial Marine, Frederick Roulette. There was also artillery here at Fort Amherstburg that was prepared. All of the guns that you see up on the bastions, they would have been already loaded and ready to fire once word came in that the schooner Cuyahoga, an American ship, was coming up the Detroit River. Again, as I mentioned, the British at Amherstburg were aware that the United States had declared war on them before the Americans in this area even knew about it. So it meant that from a British standpoint, they had a significant strategic advantage over the Americans, knowing exactly that the Americans were about to, or at least sail up the river, and the British knew they could do a surprise and take this ship. So, by doing so, the sailors sailed out from the Navy Yard, just in a boat, 6 sailors in a rowboat, with Lieutenant Roulette in command. He had a couple of pistols, and he, of course, knew that the guns at the Navy Yard and the guns at Fort Amherstburg were actually there and ready to go. So, even a small gun such as these 3-pounder cannons that you see would be able to do some significant damage to a small schooner that was sailing along the river. And again, they're going to be firing this in just a couple of seconds, so highly recommend to cover your ears.
Gun 1, fire. Gun 2, fire.
Now, in reality, although the cannons were certainly loaded and ready to go, they actually weren't needed. So although we fired them here for effect, they didn't actually need to fire the cannons. A single shot from Lieutenant Roulette's pistol was enough to convince the Cuyahoga's commander to strike his colors and surrender. Not only did the British capture all of that military intelligence, they even had General Hall's personal diary, which indicated his greatest fear, an attack by indigenous warriors. The Americans ended up making it up to Detroit, and they invaded Sandwich on July 12, 1812. And after a few days of scouting out on the 16th, they sent a vanguard of 280 soldiers to scout out the fort at Amherstburg. They met minor resistance at the bridge over the River Canard, where 2 soldiers of the 41st Regiment of Foot fired at them. The U.S. forces returned fire, killing one and wounding and capturing the other. Over the course of the next month, there were several skirmishes, including another at the River Canard and in Michigan and Mungwagon and Brownstown. The 41st Regiment of Foot was highly trained and experienced, and they caused havoc for Hull's forces. The soldiers that you see, or the soldier that you see here, dressed in this uniform of the 41st Regiment of Foot, is showing the proficiency of the manual of exercise, going through the different arms movements that were drilled into them every single day of their career, so that they could do it without thinking. The U.S. General Hull was also fearful of the British Redcoat, knowing from his experiences in the American Revolution that these soldiers were indeed the best trained in the world. On August 13, 1812, British Major General Isaac Brock arrived by ship in Amherstburg with reinforcements from New York and from Niagara. He was greeted by hundreds of First Nations warriors firing their weapons into the air. He met with the Shawnee chief Tecumseh, and they devised a plan of attacking Detroit, to which the Americans, by this point, had retreated back. Because of the capture of the Cuyahoga, Brock knew that Hull was afraid of warriors and redcoats, so they planned to exploit that. Tecumseh and the First Nations warriors crossed the Detroit River in the early morning of August 16th and began to run in full view of the fort. Then they ran into a wooded area with a ravine out of sight of the Americans, so they could circle back and start their run again. And they did this again and again and again and again. It gave the illusion to the American forces in Fort Detroit that there were not hundreds of warriors, but in fact thousands of warriors. Brock crossed the river with his army of British regulars of the 41st Regiment, as well as Canadian militia. As a ruse, he had put the militia into old redcoats to give the impression that he had doubled the amount of regulars. Finally, Brock sent a flag of truce to the fort with a letter demanding Hull's surrender, with a threat that if the contest commenced, he would not be able to control the warriors. Hull surrendered not only Fort Detroit, but also the town of Michigan and the entire territory of Michigan. Unfortunately, Major General Isaac Brock was killed a short couple of months later at the Battle of Queenston Heights. Command at Fort Amherstburg had been given to Brigadier General Henry Proctor, who was promoted to Major General after defeating another U.S. Army at the Battle of Frenchtown in modern Monroe, Michigan. Thereafter, Brock's luck turned, as over the course of the spring and summer of 1813, he and the garrison of Fort Amherstburg suffered several setbacks, including 2 failed sieges of Fort Meigs and a disastrous defeat at Fort Stevens. By September of 1813, the British were nearly out of supplies at Amherstburg. The Americans had captured Fort George and the Niagara Peninsula in May of 1813, and in late July they launched a fleet of 9 ships onto Lake Erie. Both of these circumstances prevented the transportation of supplies to this end of the province, and the situation had become critical. Proctor met with his naval counterpart in Amherstburg, Lieutenant Robert Barclay of the Royal Navy, who agreed to sail his fleet of 6 ships to attack the U.S. fleet of 9 ships under the command of Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry. Initially, the wind was in the favor of the British, and they were able to concentrate their fire on the American flagship, the USS Lawrence, which then became a floating wreck. Commodore Perry transferred to the relatively unscathed USS Niagara just as the wind started to shift. The 2 large British ships, the HMS Detroit and the HMS Queen Charlotte, collided and became entangled, making them both open targets for the Niagara and the remaining American ships to rake with fire. Now, once again, I highly suggest to cover your ears.
Fire!
What a volley! Well done. The Battle of Lake Erie could be heard all the way from Amherstburg, about 30 kilometers away. So the battle was actually right in the middle of Lake Erie, just off of the Bass Islands. As the guns fell silent, the people here could only guess what had happened. After a couple of days, with the fleet not having returned, the grim realization set in that the battle had been lost. General Proctor made the decision to abandon Amherstburg, which angered Tecumseh and his First Nations warriors. Tecumseh stood on a large rock, which is now situated in front of our Visitor Orientation Center, and he gave this very powerful speech. I'm only going to give, it's a very lengthy speech, but I'm going to give you some of the most powerful lines from it. Father, listen to your children. You see them all before you. The war before this, our British father gave the hatchet to his red children when our old chiefs were alive. They are now all dead. In that war, our father was thrown on his back by the Americans, and our father took them by the hand without our knowledge. And we are afraid that our father will do so again at this time. Listen, when war was declared, our father stood up and gave us the tomahawk and told us he was now ready to strike the Americans, that he wanted our assistance, and that certainly he would get us our land back, which the Americans had taken from us. Father, listen, our fleet has gone out. We know they have fought, we have heard the great guns, but we know nothing of what has happened to our father with one arm. Our ships have gone one way. We are much astonished to see our father tying up everything and preparing to run away the other, without letting his children know what his intentions are. You always told us you would never draw your foot off British ground. But now, Father, we see you are drawing back, and we are sorry to see our father doing so without seeing the enemy. We must compare our father's conduct to a fat dog that carries its tail upon its back, but when affrighted, it drops it between its legs and runs off. Father, you have got the arms and the ammunition which our great father sent for his children. If you have an idea of going away, give them to us, and you may go and welcome. For us, our lives are in the hands of the Great Spirit. We are determined to defend our lands, and if it be his will, we wish to leave our bones at home. So Proctor met with Tecumseh after this and convinced him somewhat of the futility of remaining at Amherstburg. The Americans controlled all of the water. They could pretty much land anywhere, and they could encircle the fort. Not to mention that most of the guns of Fort Amherstburg had actually been taken to be put on board the fleet. Tecumseh agreed to retreating with Proctor's promise of making a defensive stand somewhere along the route. Fort Amherstburg was burned to the ground, and the combined Allied forces commenced their long, arduous retreat towards Burlington. It looked so desolate. The retreat included civilians from town as well, who refused to remain in Amherstburg under U.S. control, and soldiers' families as well. During the War of 1812, 6% of the soldiers were permitted to bring their wives and children. The 41st Regiment had been in Canada for well over a decade by this point, and they had about 100 wives following the drum. These wives and children suffered through the same hardships as their husbands and their fathers. On September 27, 1813, U.S. troops landed south of Amherstburg at Bar Point, and they started marching towards the town. They built a temporary fort just outside of town, which they named Fort Covington, which is where the current Amherstburg detachment of the Windsor Police Force station is. The next day, they scouted the town and found that the fort had been burned. The Americans began their pursuit of the retreating Allies, which continued for the next week as they followed along the Thames River. The Americans caught up with them at Moraviantown, and the battle was swift and decisive, with the Americans easily destroying the fatigued redcoats, and Tecumseh was killed. The War of 1812 continued elsewhere, but Amherstburg remained under U.S. control for the remainder of the War of 1812. They rebuilt the fort and they renamed it Fort Malden. The northwest bastion and ditch, so the ones just over here, that is all that remains of the U.S. fortification. The war did end on December 24th, 1814. Of course, they didn't have telephones or emails to send messages to everybody saying, hey, it's peacetime. So it did take several months for fighting to cease and for lands to eventually be returned. On July 1st, 1815, the British returned to Amherstburg and the Americans left. Peace had finally returned to the frontier. Although during the 1820s, the British had started to rebuild the fort, adding the brick barracks that is right here, and a few other buildings, such as an officer's quarters, a cookhouse, a new guard house, and basically jail. As peace endured and funding decreased, the importance of Fort Malden lessened. In 1836, the fort was determined to be unnecessary, and the flag, if you can see way off in the bastion there, the flag was lowered and the small garrison was removed. However, rebellion started in Canada in 1837, first in the lower province, and by late of that year, they had broken out in Upper Canada. By early 1838, troops were rushed back to Fort Malden. On January 9th, 1838, the fort was fired upon for the first time in its history as a group of Canadian rebels and American sympathizers sailed the schooner Anne along the river and fired.
Oh, they got it.
Local Essex militia, including former slaves who had escaped to Canada, and he formed a company in the militia, returned fire. With that return fire, they managed to kill the helmsman of the schooner Anne and wounded several others. The schooner then was shoaled at Elliott's Point, about 2 kilometers south of town here, or south of us. At which point the militia jumped into the icy water, waded out to the Anne, and captured it. More British soldiers were sent to Fort Malden over the ensuing months, and they fought in the battles of Fighting Island and Peely Island. The 34th Regiment of Foot arrived at Fort Malden in July of 1838 to take over the garrison duties and to rebuild the fort. They constructed 2 large frame barracks, rebuilt the palisades and bastions, and built blockhouses on Bois Blanc Island. On December 4th, 1838, the rebels invaded and occupied Windsor. Canadian militia fought with the rebels until the 34th Regiment of Foot from Fort Malden arrived. So in reality, it was about 400 rebels that actually occupied the town of Windsor, as that was actually being called by that name. The 34th Regiment, of course, got wind of that. They were stationed here in Amherstburg. It took about 5 hours for them to mobilize and start marching towards Sandwich Town, or And during that time, local militia of the Essex and Kent started to push the rebels out of the village back to the riverfront. They were commanded by the local member of legislature, a guy by the name of John Prince, who was notorious at the time and really increased his notoriety by summarily executing 5 rebels without a trial, which made him a hero, to be honest. So you'll notice we have some blue coats running onto the field on this side. No, they are not Americans or Frenchmen. They are members of the Royal Regiment of Artillery. And so in order to sort of finish off the battle, as the 34th Regiment from Fort Malden arrived, they also brought with them a very small contingent of Royal Artillery and 2 6-pounder cannons, so that the rebels pretty much knew that the day was done and the time was to leave the Canadian fort. The rebels started to reboard their boats so they had crossed over the river. During that time, the 34th Regiment fired volleys at them, while the Royal Artillery, manned by some soldiers from the 34th, also continued to fire at the boats to scatter these rebels and clear them from the Canadian side. Again, this gun is louder than the 3-pounder. I highly suggest to cover your ears.
Keep your mouth.
Loud. So imagine this, the 34th Regiment of Foot had about 600 soldiers here in Amherstburg. So you kind of have to imagine about 60 times what we have here. It would have been a ton of smoke, 6-pounders firing, muskets firing, and the fear of a British bayonet charge would have been enough to send the rebels running for the US side. Now, in 1842, the last regular British Army regiment arrived to take over the garrison duties at Fort Malden. They were the newly formed Royal Canadian Rifle Regiment, made of veteran soldiers who were unlikely to desert to the United States. This regiment took over most of the forts in Canada, such as the Halifax Citadel, Fort Wellington and Prescott, Fort Henry and Kingston, and of course Fort Malden. In 1851, it was decided that having a regular garrison was quite frankly too costly. So the Royal Canadian Rifle Regiment was here from 1842 to 1851. And basically, they really did more like policing in town. They basically guarded the fort, but really there wasn't a whole lot of action going on during that period. But in 1851, it costing too much money to have these Royal Canadian Rifles here, instead it was decided to make Amherstburg a part of the enrolled pensioners scheme. So this was basically the uniform of the enrolled pensioners. They were retired soldiers who were shipped to the town in July, where they were given land to build cottages for their families, and they rotated through garrison duties both here at the fort and on Île Boisblanc, or Wablo, I should say, sorry, Wablo Island. Many of these pensioners' cottages still exist today in town, and restored ones are both here at Fort Malden, at the north end of the site, and at the Park House Museum in the King's Navy Yard. This year actually marks the 175th anniversary of the enrolled pensioners coming to Amherstburg. The pensioner that you see here is using a pattern 1853 Enfield rifled musket, which was a standard British Army weapon in the Crimean War period. So the uniform almost really looks more like a magistrate, like some kind of really police officer from that standpoint. For these people, they had to spend their time sort of maintaining the structures and guarding the fort and the river. And they continued this scheme right up until 1859, until they basically realized that this was actually costing the British government more than just having a regular garrison. So they decided to scrap the entire scheme in 1859. Needing no longer a fortification here in 1859, they eventually decided to transfer the fort's property to the province of Canada West, who transformed the fort into a provincial lunatic asylum. Over the next 11 years, hundreds of patients were treated here, with doctors and nurses living on site as well. After a fire in 1860, the laundry and the bakery building was constructed, which is now our big museum building back here. In 1870, the asylum was moved to St. Thomas, and the fort entered a new phase, heavy industrial. In 1875, the site was purchased by the Park and Borrowman Mill, who converted the fort, or the laundry building, into a planing mill, and the rest of the fort into a lumber yard. For the next 4 decades, that was this site. Many local laborers sought employment at the firm until it closed in 1918. Afterwards, a local wealthy lawyer, Franklin Huff, purchased the property and began converting it into housing. He converted the brick barracks into rental units, with the cookhouse becoming a 1-car garage. He severed the large number 1 frame barracks that was over on the north side here and moved them a couple of 100 meters north on Laird Avenue, where they still stand today as private residences. And most notably, he converted the old laundry building and the bakery, which of course was at that point a planing mill, into his personal residence. So basically, if you go into the museum today, it doesn't look like an industrial building. It looks very much like a residence. It's got beautiful hardwood floors, very, very intricate crown molding. This was all done during this time period when he decided to take this building and basically turn it into his private home. It's kind of an interesting situation, really, when you look at the cost of, say, moving these buildings down the road, of converting this, by that point, 100-year-old building into residences. Realistically, he could have just torn it all down and rebuilt. So in a way, Frank Huff himself kind of actually ended up preserving history to an extent. It may not be the way that we would love it. I'd love to have number 1 frame barracks still here and use it, but at that time period, he basically needed to use it for something, and he saw a use of the site. He was able to convert it into that sort of thing. In 1921, after over a decade of petitioning by prominent local citizens, Fort Malden was designated as a National Historic Site by the Historic Sites and Monuments Board of Canada. So this was all happening during that period of time that Franklin Huff, who was, of course, owning property at the same time as a prominent group of residents, the editor-in-chief of the Amherstburg Echo, local politicians, that kind of thing, wanted to designate this as a National Historic Site. Frank Huff, on the other hand, basically walking along here, decided instead he wanted to realize it more as residential. However, the Historic Sites and Monuments Board did designate it in 1939 the stone building that is currently the Visitor Orientation Center that you came in today. That building was constructed, as a museum to honor the fort and the town's history. Frank Huff passed away in 1945, and Parks Canada purchased the property. And over the next several decades, restored the soldiers' barracks, converted Frank Huff's house into a museum, and essentially started operating as a National Historic Site. Parks Canada has continued to protect, preserve, and present this vital piece of Canadian history through storytelling, school tours, and military and domestic animation programming. I hope that you enjoyed our little presentation today and learned a little bit about the history of Fort Malden. On behalf of all the reenactor volunteers that came and that really made this show really what it was, and the staff of Fort Malden and Parks Canada, thank you very much for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day at Fort Malden.